Bienvenidos! Today we're going to talk about how to use reflexive verbs in Spanish. Reflexive verbs are simply verbs in which the subject is the doer of the action and the recipient of the action. We use these verbs in English and we don't often recognize them. An example would be, I wash myself. So I is the subject, wash is the verb, and then myself is in reference to the subject receiving the action. So with reflexive verbs, the subject is the doer and the recipient of the action. And we have what's called a reflexive pronoun that indicates the recipient. Now this recipient is always going to match up with the subject. So in English we have a list of subject pronouns here and a list of reflexive pronouns that are always used with these particular subject pronouns. So with the subject pronoun I, we would always use myself. You singular, yourself. You plural, yourselves. We, ourselves. He, himself. She, herself. They, themselves. And in Spanish, reflexive verbs work very similarly. There's one small difference, but other than that, we have a subject, a verb, and a recipient pronoun. We take that same sentence in Spanish, yo me lavo. And what we notice is that we have the subject pronoun yo, just like in English, I, but the reflexive pronoun me comes before the verb in Spanish. In English, the reflexive pronoun comes after the verb, myself. In Spanish, we have the reflexive pronoun me and then lavo. And notice that in Spanish, the verb is conjugated according to the subject pronoun yo. We have yo, and we conjugated lavar, the verb lavar, in the yo form. And we selected the reflexive pronoun me to match yo. In Spanish, if we look at our list of subject pronouns in Spanish, we have a list of reflexive pronouns that would be used with each subject pronoun. Yo, me, tú, te, usted, se, ustedes, se, nosotros, nos, nosotras, nos, él, se, ella, se, ellos, se, ella, se. And if you look at this list, you can see that there are really only 5 different reflexive pronouns in Spanish. We have me, te, nos, and then se. With our first and second person subject pronouns, yo, second person familiar, and first person plural, we have specific pronouns to go with those. But with all of the other subject pronouns, ustedes, ustedes, él, ella, ellos, ellas, we use se. Okay? So we really only have 5 pronouns to learn. Me, I'm sorry, I can't count. 4 pronouns. Me, te, nos, and se. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that, just like in English, we don't always have to be washing ourselves. We could be washing something else. In that case, this verb is non-reflexive, and we wouldn't use a reflexive pronoun. I wash the car. So here, this is not a reflexive verb. And in Spanish, the same thing. We use lavar to talk about washing other things other than ourselves. Yo lavo el carro. In this case, we just leave out the reflexive pronoun. When we write the verb reflexively in the infinitive form, it would be lavarse. So if you look up verbs in a vocabulary list or in the dictionary and you see them written like this, lavarse, it means that's the reflexive form of the verb. And the non-reflexive form would just be lavar. If we wanted to use a reflexive pronoun in a sentence where we're negating the action, él no se llama Pedro, he doesn't call himself Pedro. We notice that the reflexive pronoun se always comes immediately before the verb. So the no comes before the reflexive pronoun, but after the subject pronoun. So we have the subject pronoun, él, he, and then no, then the reflexive pronoun se, and then llama Pedro. Notice that llama is the verb llamar, which means to call, and when we use it reflexive, it becomes llamarse. Call oneself. And we put the subject pronoun first, then the negation, then the reflexive pronoun. Llama is conjugated according to the subject of the sentence él. So he does not call himself Pedro. Él no se llama Pedro.